Hey everyone, this is Bailey Reed with Youth Voices Kentucky. Today I'm joined by the incredibly talented Jon Cherry, a Louisville-based photographer and photojournalist who uses his images to advocate and spark change. In this interview, we're going to discuss advocacy through artistry and how powerful using different artistic mediums can truly be when advocating for a cause. Jon, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Bailey. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm super excited to do this interview. I just wanted to start off by asking, how long have you been doing photography?
I have only been doing photography for about 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow. So fairly fresh.
yeah,
And
full
then how did
time for
you?
about 9 months.
Okay. Wow. Super fresh. You're like new into the game. That's so exciting.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
how did you discover your passion for photography?
Well, it started whenever I was young. I was about 14 or 15, and my dad and I went to a yard sale. We got several volumes of National Geographic, and he bought me a Shannon 35 millimeter film camera and a few lenses for it. And he
Wow.
was a photographer growing up, just dabbled here and there. He was an artist of different formats, but he also did photo. So he taught me everything I needed to know about this camera, and I kind of grew out of it. I felt like it was a phase whenever I was a teenager, and then getting back into my 20s again. I was actually a model on a shoot, on a
Okay.
like a food and beverage shoot. Lifestyle shoot. There were other people around. There were these other models, and there was all this lighting equipment, these cool cameras, and I saw all that, and it really sparked something in me to make me think like, "Ooh, I could do this." And so, if you think a few weeks later, I went out and bought um, a Craigslist DSLR through a really sketchy buy meeting with a guy. I'm pretty sure this camera was stolen, um, and then it kind of started from there.
Wow.
Uh,
That's crazy. That's interesting that it like started off when you were younger and then just kind of fell out somewhere in the middle and then just happened to do a shoot and re-get back into it.
yeah, I mean, it was probably a 15-year gap since the time that I was young, and maybe not 15 years. It's probably like a 13-year gap between when I put the camera down and put it back up again just a few years ago.
Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine, but that's awesome that it just came back around. You had a full circle moment.
Yeah.
um, so what inspired you specifically to take pictures that were showing activism?
Um, so my activism before 2020 was mainly towards like environmentalism,
Mhm.
uh, like avian biology, things like that. And so I was a really big wildlife photographer, and I enjoyed, and I still do. I just don't have as much time for it. It was a hobby, and now my hobby is, also is still taking photos, but I do it for work more often than I do anything else. So anyway, yeah, going out and tracking birds and taking pictures of birds and wildlife to kind of point at the intersection of human industry, and uh, and these birds of prey, essentially to show people that both are possible only because of the resilience of these animals. We do a lot of damage in the world during our time here, and disrupt a lot of really natural processes. And fortunately, our world is resilient right now to be able to handle all of that. So anyway, what drew me to shooting the protests and showing people what kind of activism was happening here in Louisville, um, was that night of the protest. My best friend Scott Smith, who you'll see him walk by here in a little bit, he's actually packing, getting ready to head out of town. He pulled up in front of my house on the evening of May 28th. Told me that 7 people had been shot downtown, and that we should probably go down and check it out. And so, he convinced me to bring my camera. From there, the rest is history. I spent the majority of my time last year documenting the protests in downtown Louisville, Jefferson Square Park, and other places as well. But yeah, that was one of those things that for me, whenever, in particular, for those that don't know, which everyone should know now, the Louisville protests were sparked by the killing of George Floyd, retroactively then the killing of Breonna Taylor. George Floyd was killed on May 25th. Breonna Taylor was killed on March 13th. There was a small set of activists that recognized that there was something very, very wrong with the death of Breonna Taylor, and it was what took George Floyd's death to really kind of be the spark that set off the big gas fire that was all the protests around. And in each individual city, then people started recognizing these injustices that they could take to the streets for. It also helped that there was COVID and nobody had any jobs.
Right.
Everybody's working from home, if not. And so, we saw this massive undertaking of just mass protest action and movement. But I felt that whenever Louisville started its protests, that there was not a whole lot of attention on it because of how extreme things were in
Hmm.
other cities, in Los Angeles and Minneapolis. Particularly in Minneapolis, because it was mass destruction.
Right.
So it had a lot of flair, and it had a lot of attention. And what was happening in Louisville wasn't as glamorous, but I think it deserved as much attention. So I dedicated a lot of time to that, and then eventually people started really paying attention to
Right.
what was happening here.
Yeah. And I agree. There were so many areas throughout the United States that everyone was so focused on, especially on the
Hmm.
news. But here in Louisville, like our state news was very focused on it. So it's interesting because to us, to people who live in Louisville and who were in it and could experience it, really got to see everything full blast and for what it was. And it was crazy. It was just so much at one time to handle. And then you see people all over the news and you're like, this is happening everywhere. And people might not know how large it is here and it might not get as much national attention, but I think it really sparked and created a bunch of local activists who are really passionate for the causes of racial justice and um, reforming our criminal justice system. So it's super exciting to see that. And it's super cool that you're able to portray that through pictures. I spent some time scrolling through the different pictures that you had on your Instagram, and I was amazed. It's just crazy the power that you can just encapture in a picture. And it's like everything just stops when you look at it, and it's that moment. And I think that's a really powerful gift to be able to give, and it inspires other people to see people that they know or that live in their community going out and advocating for change. And I think also it's interesting that from beyond that, they can acknowledge that you yourself are advocating for change just by going out and taking pictures, which I think a lot of people might not realize when they see pictures. They're like, oh, those people are advocates. And it's like, that's not the only way to advocate. You yourself, by going out and taking these pictures and putting them out into the world, is a whole new form of advocacy. So, how would you say that photography can really help promote different causes?
Um, so I can use a really good example for this one, not just for my work, but to advocate for the work of somebody who I think does really good stuff. He's a Getty Images staff photographer. He's the only staff special correspondent that Getty Images has, and he works at the border. He does a lot of stuff on the Texas border. We've got a dog right here that's barking at me, right just beyond the camera. Get out of here. And his name is John Moore, and he documents what is happening at the border as far as like migrants from South America coming across the Rio Grande and then being processed by Border Patrol or ICE or whoever it is. I'm not super versed on what happens at the border. However, at the beginning of the Biden administration's term, so January 2020, January
Hmm.
2020, or February 20th, I don't remember, January 20th. It's the beginning of his term. The administration essentially determined that no media could cover what was happening at the border from the United States side. And so you couldn't see what was happening at the border, and people were cut off from that news. Um, Journalists were not allowed to take photos. They weren't allowed to even be down there. Anytime they were along the border, they were essentially treated as if they were trespassing, which is a really impactful thing. You don't realize how important the news is until it is no longer allowed to be captured.
Hmm.
Um, and so what John did is then he went to Mexico and he shot what was happening at the border from Mexico side, and was very, because this is his job, because photojournalism is his job, and he has the special assignment of covering the border. Uh, he made sure that the administration and Customs and Border Protection knew that what they were doing was not only him interrupting his job, but it was essentially interrupting disrupting the rights that we all have as Americans to know what's happening in our country. And so, just give me 1 second. I'm sorry. How that's going to be for the recording. There we go.
It'll be all good. I'll be able to
cut
in certain places.
You're gonna splice it together. Okay. So essentially, by documenting what was happening from the Mexico side, he was essentially showing this disruption that the U.S. government was putting in the way of media, and that's just one example of many examples. Oftentimes, I think that photojournalism, photography has a chance to like solve or at least call to attention humanitarian efforts, civil rights efforts.
Yeah, and that's really powerful and exciting and new that he was able to go beyond our border and shoot from Mexico's border, from the other side of the border. And I think that also makes a powerful statement in saying that, people were denied rights of media and denied rights of things that we should be able to see and have access to and hear about, which like kind of brings about media censorship, which is a really interesting topic. Have you ever had media by you like censored or anyone try to make it seem less than what it was?
I personally have not had to deal with anything that I've put out being censored. I've had people, I took photos in Indianapolis of, not Indianapolis, in DeKalb County, Indiana, where there was a protest, like an anti-KKK protest. At the same time, there was a scheduled KKK meeting.
Ooh.
And there was a right, and never saw the KKK meeting. People were circling back around this protest at the courthouse, and there was this judge that showed up, and they were very obviously had the bulletproof cell, had ARs and AKs and stuff, and I in my caption noted them militia, and then they emailed me later on noting that they were not a militia, that they were a civil defense group, I think is what they called it. And so yeah, that's really the only issue I've ever had. Of course, there's censor in the field, which is a completely different thing, where you have sometimes agents of government that don't want you to take photos of certain things because it might not show them in the best light, or because they're in a high stress situation and a photographer being around. So like protests, we've heard a lot of violence in Minneapolis and in Louisville and in Los Angeles about Kenosha as well, about violence towards journalists when they're very obviously journalists. So I've seen that a couple of times, but nothing too much. I feel like most of the time I really have an opportunity to speak with my truest voice.
Yeah. And that in general is just something I'm interested in because I'm actually going to be a senior in high school this year, and journalism is something I'm looking for college possibly. And so it's really interesting to see different sides of journalism. I'm better, more of the writing aspect. I think I'd be terrible as a photographer. I don't think I could do very well. But it's interesting to see it from just different aspects and know that like they all have those same categories that kind of meet in that regard, like media censorship or like going in and being in those high risk situations to try and bring the most truth to a situation that you can to people, despite the light that might throw on other people. But just to like segue into something else, what cause are you most passionate about and why?
It's a really interesting one. I feel like I jump from not from cause to cause, but I find a lot of like common threads in different causes that I try to stay aware of. Since it's such an interesting question because we as humans, particularly as American humans, are constantly dealing with various structures and systems that really are not on our side, and every single person, has a list of causes within them that they're either trying to fight or they're trying to advocate for to improve their lives and those around them. And whether that's for liberty, racial justice, whether it's refugee or immigrant law or justice, it can be kind of hard to hone in on just one, because they're all really important to me. I've been really focusing a lot on Appalachia lately, and that's where a lot of my research has been.
Okay.
I'm originally from North Carolina, and we're in Kentucky, just kind of on the outskirts of the range.
Hmm.
And so I think that there's not only is there a pretty heavy population of Black folks in Appalachia that are forgotten about. Uh, the population of Appalachia is like really unhealthy right now. There's not a whole lot of jobs, and like places like Harlan County, Kentucky is like the number one worst long health in the country for its individuals. And so a lot of my like focus and research is like in that direction. It's like, how can we show what's happening here in a compassionate way, because people will document um,
Hmm.
rural areas that have any kind of like racial or economic disparity uh, in a certain way that it's almost pornographic in nature. Like, look at all these dirty kids sitting in this
Hmm.
pile of mud. It's not how I intend to capture it all. There's a lot more. There's a lot more respect and naturalism that comes within a rural person. I think that there's a lot more just kind of action with life outside the city,
Hmm.
just natural life. And so that's the things that I'd like to highlight without going in and having preconceived notions about it, which is a challenge as a journalist. Like, you might, we're people like you and I, we're people of color, so we step into situations differently than white photographers or white journalists would.
Hmm.
But we know that we have that on our side in a way, that like we have a completely different set of experiences. So whenever I have an assignment to go and shoot like a KKK rally or something like that, like that, my experience is going to be very different um, because of like my role in this country as black. So uh, it's that's tough for me.
Yeah.
I feel like it's all really important. But it depends on who the photographer is, and probably what some of their experiences as well.
Yeah. And I think it's really important what you mentioned about shooting from that aspect that's not almost in that pornographic way where, like you said, look at those dirty kids. It's important and really powerful in pictures when you can see like the humanity in people. It's not stripped away from the way that they're written about or stripped away from the way that people are photographed. It's like these are
Right.
people too, and they're a part of us. Whether other people acknowledge it or not, and they're a part of our community. And then you can see like these are people who should have the same rights and the same privileges as you and I do, but they're less unfortunate based on their racial demographic and where they live. And so taking it in that more diplomatic way versus exploiting maybe the bad parts of humanity and things that people haven't really seen or they associate with being negative, is really important when advocating for people, because I guess depending on the way that something is shot or something is written about, it can have that positive or negative connotation, and that just sways how people want to help or get involved or what they think on a certain situation. um, so yeah, what would you say is the power of photography to you?
That's an interesting question too. I enjoy photography as a creative outlet. Um, Step situations as a prop lover as well. Like, there's a certain type of photo that I want to take today. There's certain types of photos that I want to take today on this assignment or whatever I'm doing. But when you step into the scene, you always know exactly what it looks like in the place that you're stepping into. It's not always the perfect light. It's not always the perfect like. Um, there might be 40 other photographers there who are kind of in your way, and you're in their way too. Um, so it's there's a problem solving aspect of it that I constantly get to practice and to sharpen that blade. so to speak, really access. That is the very first event that I've ever photographed was a concert, a friend of mine concert. And I brought my camera. I was really nervous. I used to be really nervous of people seeing me shooting, with a camera, a photo. And I'd be looking around and make sure, does this look stupid? Does everybody know that I don't know what I'm doing? So, but I noticed it didn't matter. As soon as I walked into, this crowded bar, showroom area, people saw that I had a camera and they were just really polite and they kind of let me have my way around the entire room and then up onto the stage and so there's this kind of access that it gives you not just to places but to events.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a moment in time that more normally you don't get this or they don't pay too much into because they're participating. For example, like on all the protests in Louisville last year, having to be kind of hyper aware and making it my personal task to observe what's happening. I feel like I soaked up a lot more of the experience than maybe some of the people who were there chasing signs because they were really just kind of focused on what they were doing and how they could best, represent themselves in the group. But people that are on the outside looking in and are sure they're keeping an eye on, it's happening. It's kind of an interesting practice as well to step into a room and immediately try to get a big picture of it and see to you might be the most important aspect of the story that's being told. And then just part of events. Normally people don't get to be and just through research, and you'll learn this too, that when you start reaching or you listen to people who are very good at reaching and they can reach for you or research with, the more and more events that you can cover, that that you can cover, either whether it's spot news or a kind of story that you're doing, you get to talk to really cool people that if you were just going about your day, you probably would have never talked to them, would have asked them the questions that you had. For example, what you're doing right now, you're much a journalistic interview, which makes this all very that you are, asking all of these questions. You and I could have passed each other on the sidewalk, but have never known any of this stuff about me at all. I think that's me. Power of photojournalism, power of photography. I think is a complete. It's not completely a question. Power of photography. I think that since humans are very much visually driven, and that photographs can be taken and it can be altered with intent to get people to feel a certain way about something. So when I say when they can be taken, there can be things that can be excluded from the frame. For example, like I don't want you to see. I don't want, like, for example, all the stuff that was on this desk. Like, it looks like I have a nice, neat house, right? All the stuff that was on this desk earlier that I moved because I woke up late. It's sitting right there. So that's that you can exclude from the frame to tell, to send a message if you can do it ethically.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's super important that photography, like, people are visual learners. And I know personally when I see pictures of things, it really will strike a chord with me. And I'll look at that and go, why haven't we been doing something about this? Or why have I never seen this before? And so that's important. And so is the opening doors to be able to speak to new people. And like you said, I would have never known. I would have known nothing. I would have been looking at your pictures and being like, these are great. And they're inspiring me to want to go do something. But I have no idea what this guy has to say. So it's honestly, it changes so much. I'm sure the world of photography and getting to meet all these people and hearing all these new perspectives really changes you as a person and changes your way of thought and kind of challenges it sometimes, which is really exciting and new, and definitely something that's good to encourage in communities, even just through putting those pictures out into the world and having people be able to see them. Obviously, it's going to make people want to ask questions, which is good. That's what we should be doing. So to move on from that, what has been your most powerful experience with photography?
I'd say to this day, It was either June 15th, 2020 or January 6th, 2021 in Washington, D.C. Both of those are very heavily contrasting places, the things, but they're both, acts of protest or
Mm-hmm.
dissidents or civil unrest. June 15th, 2020 was the day that the camp at Jefferson's Park was founded, and that was after a pretty wild day of civil unrest. People blocking traffic. I have a section on my website that has that date and shows everything that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably one of the most wildly cinematic days and wildly powerful days, and it was one of those days where I really felt that I understood my cameras, I understood where to be. I felt very brave to, and so I feel like everything that I captured was just golden, and it was beautiful light that day. I think that technically, like, it was a great day to photograph. Technically, it was just beautiful light, beautiful action, all kinds of just amazing otherworldly stuff happening.
Yeah.
And then in contrast to that, on January 6th in Washington, D.C., I was, for those who don't know, January 6th, Washington, D.C. was the day of attempted insurrection
Mm-hmm.
by, mob of Trump supporters that were aiming to break into the U.S. Capitol building to interrupt the ratification of the Electoral College because they did not agree with the election of the 46th president, Joe
Mm-hmm.
Biden. So that being said, completely different circumstances, but still a bunch of really angry people who felt like the best way to represent their opinion of what's happening in the world was to take action
Mm-hmm.
and go and disrupt some stuff. And one case I felt was like a really technically great day, piece of history. The other day in Washington, D.C. was kind of cloudy. I didn't feel super, I had a new camera. I wasn't super comfortable with. I was really frightened. And I normally don't operate nervously. And I'm normally not frightened, but for some reason that day, I was very nervous when I was
Mm-hmm.
going around. And I was being like hurled insults and stuff the entire time. They really don't like the media, that crowd.
Yes.
And being a Black member of media too is probably like a double hitter for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a day that it was an event that I will never forget, and I'm really glad that I was there, that I was a part of it, and that I got to capture. I don't feel like it was my best work. I've heard other people say the opposite. But me personally, I don't feel like it was my favorite work of mine. But yeah, I'd say that was the day, January 6th.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't even imagine being there in person because I was seeing it all from pictures. I was scrolling through social media. I turned on the news and I was like, what is going on? So that, like, to me was a wild moment. And I'm like miles and miles and miles away from the situation. So I can't imagine standing there in the middle of that particular group of people, being a photographer and a person of color. I understand where that fear was coming from, and that's incredibly hard. And to be in those type of situations and feel comfortable and feel like maybe it definitely was not a welcoming feeling situation. There was a lot going on and a lot of violence and protesting and just a lot of turmoil in general that day. But I think it's really powerful and it's really important how you get into those situations that maybe some people are not as comfortable being around because you're exposing people to those situations that they weren't going to put themselves in, which is, it's good. And it helps people to want to ask questions and to create change and people to be like, oh my gosh, it's eye-opening for a lot of people, especially if people are not particularly involved in going about and doing their own research on things that they're passionate about or that they're curious about. So yeah, I cannot believe that's so crazy that you were there. I've never heard of anyone who I know being like, I was there that day, but there you were. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think I'm the only Kentucky representative of the media. There were some people who were from Kentucky who were not with the media who were there.
Okay.
Uh,
Wow.
That's a completely different thing. You probably don't know any of those people because I think they're right now.
No, I do not know those people.
Yeah.
So, how would you describe the significance of powerful images in today's media?
Well, that's a really interesting question. The power of images in today's media. Well, the media is a little bit sick right now. There's a war on the truth. There's a war on facts. Um, and that's something that this is without while me remaining a neutral party in the realm of politics, you can undoubtedly say that Donald Trump had a lot to do with this, a lot to do with the erosion of people's faith in what's happening in the media and what is depicted. But you cannot deny what you see in photos. And as long as the media continues, as long as the news media continues to run ethically, and because within all of that, there is like certain things that you don't doctor up about your photos. You might do a little bit of color correction here. You might crop and straighten a little bit here and there. Raise the shadows, drop the highlights, things like that. But one thing you will not do is you will not crop out important things like this. You will not remove people or add people into certain things. That's one of the things that really separates of democracies from media of like dictatorships, like North Korea. There's a lot of editing of the media that make people feel a certain way because you're constantly inundated with it. You have the 24-hour news cycle. You have news articles that pop up on your Facebook. You have news articles that pop up whenever you're browsing on the internet. I mean, they're all over the place. You can't go anywhere without running into national news. So the fact that it is undoctored and that it is truthful, that it is factual, is extremely, extremely important. And so I say all that to say that, as long as we continue to have an ethically running source of news, people can't deny the facts of what they see in photos. You see a photo of a crime scene, if you see a photo of a protest, you know at least that it was happening. You might not agree with why it happened, but you at least know that here is a matter of fact. And so I think that's one of the biggest impacts of photography, is even outside of words, outside of written, is that you have proof, photographic proof, undeniable proof that something even happened in the first place, which is what we're dealing with right now, is people denying that things ever even happened at all.
Yeah. And with media running ethically, that's always a really interesting concept, especially like what you were saying with North Korea, like lots of censorship of images and of news and what they choose to talk about and what they don't, and even what we see of them, even though some of us are aware of that type of censorship. But running things ethically in a time where people are so polarized politically is really important, because I mean, the power of an image can sway you one way or another, depending on how you look at it and what you see. But just taking those pictures to show people what's going on around them with zero other, like, you're not trying to, well, you're trying to impact how they feel, but in a way that they're thinking about the situation more than they are agreeing or disagreeing with what they're seeing. And that's really important, because people are going to use things to say, well, this is what I think, and this is what's right, and this is what's wrong. And so being able to have media that is truthful and that shows what is happening and is like, here it is, now you make up your mind, is really important. So people can't really weaponize photography against each other in that way that you might see in other countries. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well said.
Yeah. So if you had to describe activism, like, what does activism mean to you?
So activism is such a general term, but to me it means, so I'll do two things. I'll say what it means to me, and then I'll say what it means for what I do. To me, it means organizing and speaking out in ways that will change change what you deem changeable. I think that might actually be really close to the literal term too. Is it's somebody who just participates in or leads, a pursuit of change.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for me in my photography, my activism comes through in what I do photograph, and what I do research and what I do go after. So the different, and then you'll see this with every photographer, every photojournalist. Not everybody shoots everything. Of course, I still need to make money. This is how I make a living. So
Mm-hmm.
I do shoot everything. If I see something that looks really interesting, it might not be interesting to me, but it might be nationally interesting. Uh, then I'll pick, and then sometimes it'll get picked up, or oftentimes it'll get picked up, and then I'll go and take photos of something that doesn't really mean a lot to me. I still want it to look like it means a lot to me. I still want it to be um, within the practice of my craft in a way that speaks to people, and makes them care about what it is that's being photographed. But it might not be the most important thing to me. Um, but the things that I choose to make like special projects of mine, because one of the ethics within journalism too is acting as a kind of a neutral party. Um, because I can no longer serve any kind of I can't explicitly serve any kind of activism objective, or I can't just go out and just go into the street with my camera and just shout Black Lives Matter. I will never be hired again.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I would like to do that, but there are different ways that you can um, shine light on events that are happening, particularly with like Black folks. Like, what are some of the big issues that Black folks face? Um, that's how I try to tackle um, different um, different tactics within activism. You have to be a little bit more, conscious, because you can't just explicitly say that you want this thing to change. You just have to
Mm-hmm.
cover it.
Yeah. um, and then finally, for my last question, what advice would you give to young artists or young photographers who want to be advocates and want to spark change?
So it really is an exercise of the heart to go and photograph things that are extremely important to you, especially things that you would like to change. So you have to challenge yourself in a lot of different ways. You have to ask yourself why every time before you go out and shoot, before you go out and write. You have to ask yourself, why is this important to yourself, and why are you doing it? Are you doing it because it seems glamorous, or because it seems like something other people are interested in? Or is this something that you're really specially geared to do? Is this your story? You hear people say that a lot, like, this is my story. Um, this is my assignment. Um, you take a lot of personal investment within what it is that you're investigating, or the thing that you're covering, or the thing that you're exposing. And the story becomes a part of you. But there also, for it to become a part of you, you have to separate yourself from it a little bit. Um, because if you go into it emotionally, if you come into it with preconceived notions about even something that you might be an expert in, you come into it with any preconceived notions, then I feel like you're already a little bit tainted about it, and you can't properly tell the story in a way that people on the outside can read or understand or know.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely something very important about being someone on the inside and telling a story that people should know, because you're from a marginalized community that is not often listened to. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
that's a very important distinction as well. Um, I think that um, you can't be afraid to make mistakes as well, and that just goes for any part of your life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you don't risk it, what are you really in it for? And something that was told to me a long time ago, and this goes with photo and it goes for everything else, is get close. The closer you get, the better your photos are,
Mm-hmm.
the more risk you take. Um, but also just get close to your subjects in general. Like, really get to know people, get their first and last names whenever you speak to them. Um, ask people what they do for a living. There's a lot of people who talk about like taking photos and taking content. And I know that they mean take a photo, but what I often hear is that kind of exploitative, like, take this thing, take this photo, and just so like you're there to observe, and participate only as an observer uh, should. And Yeah, I'd say that's the meat of it. That's a lot, but that's the meat of it for me. It's those are things whenever I'm on my way to an assignment that I try to think about. It's like, you want to get close, but you also want to be somebody who's separated from the entire situation enough that you can tell a story with a great big picture perspective.
Yeah. And about going into things with preconceived notions, that's something I've had to personally look a lot into this year. Lots of issues or things that were happening, I went into with these ideas and these thoughts that I had personally from doing research or from knowing about things. But it's really interesting when you can just clear your head and sit back and look in the moment and be like, this is what's happening. Here it is. And it's important to have those moments where maybe you're not going into things thinking that something's going to go one way, because you could be completely surprised by
Yeah.
whatever you're thinking. You just never know really what you're going to get, and you don't know the impact that you could have had if you go into something already thinking one way about it. And yeah, I think that's really great advice, for people who are artists and people who are photographers and who want to go out and make change, just to go into it without preconceived notions and just know what you're there for. Like, be aware of what you intend to get out of it and what you want other people to get from it, if that's something that you choose to share. Well, thank you for being here today. It's been a pleasure hearing and learning from you, and I just know that you're going to continue on with all your great work and continue to inspire other people, me included. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That means so much, and I really appreciate you having me on to speak my piece and kind of talk about how I go about doing things. And I can't wait to see more interviews from you.
Yeah,
It's been a
thank
really fun
you.
time.